Sometimes there are coincidences that fall from seemingly nowhere. For many years, I was fascinated by the mysteries of our brain about visions and storytelling. Unexpectedly, I was contacted by the eminent brain scientist Raphael Juste, here to the left, to work on a film together. Raphael is at the forefront of research that will change the world as much as the understanding of DNA has changed it. Where would this project take us, since our approaches were so different? He as a methodical scientist, I more from the perspective of filmmaking and poetry. Early on, Raphael gave me a crash course in the basics of the human brain.
Because you can actually, you take it up. You see, all of this stuff that's pink is the cortex, and what's inside, what I took off, this is the brainstem and the rest of the brain.
We decided to go on a road trip together. First stop, the Pacific Northwest, Mount Rainier in the hazy distance, not far from the city of Seattle. We were about to meet a colleague and friend of Raphael, Christoph Koch. He only agreed to face our camera if we met him at his daily rowing routine at daybreak. He gave us specific instructions about the activities at his rowing club and the exact position of the early sun low on the horizon. We dutifully obliged. Only after Christoph Koch had rowed himself into a Zen-like serenity, he would be ready to speak. The two friends had not met for a long time. Dr. Christoph Koch is of German origin. He is the head of the Allen Institute of Brain Science and is one of the world's leading experts in consciousness. Dr. Koch, we have seen you rowing. You're an athlete. It looks magnificent to see you out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much enjoyed being alone on the water and just being all action, all motion, being in the flow without thought.
You can somehow switch off thoughts.
Yeah, when you are in this peculiar state called flow, you're hyper-conscious of the environment, in my case, the set of the boat, the oars, the water, the waves, the environment around me. But that inner voice, that constant critic that always reminds you of your inadequacy and things you still have to do, that's totally gone. It's a very blissful state.
You do study consciousness scientifically.
Yes, my goal over the last 40 years has been to understand how conscious experience arises, particularly in brains, and how it fits into the rest of the universe, particularly the laws of science. Let me show you something here. So what makes human and our thoughts and our memories and our thoughts are really this outermost layer of the brain called the cortex. And it's a two-dimensional sheet. It's like, it's this size. I cut it out to be this size. It's the size of a pizza, 12 to 14-inch pizza, roughly the thickness, you know, of a pizza with some extra cheese on top. And it's highly folded like this, and you have one on the left and one on the right. And the central mystery of the ancient mind-body problem is, how does thought, how does conscious, how does color and motion and pain and pleasure and love and hate, how does that emerge from this tissue? Because we know that if you stimulate this tissue, you can get all these thoughts and pain and love and hate. So how does it happen? And so we study it both in human and patients. as well as in much smaller animals that are more accessible. So this is a slightly magnified model of a mouse brain. We study consciousness in these mice. And so they're quite similar. They're much smaller. They're roughly 1,000 times smaller than the human brain, but otherwise they're very similar. And so once again, we try to understand, how does consciousness arise out of these neurons? For the first time in human history, we can determine whether a patient, let's say, who's locked in or who is who had a bad accident or alcohol intoxication, we can now tell whether they're conscious, although they can't signal anymore, they can't talk to us anymore because they are so, their brain is so damaged. We can now tell whether there's anybody home.
Reading minds in a way of somebody who cannot speak anymore.
Exactly.
Translating it into language.
Exactly. Translating at least simple commands and simple questions. Are you well? Do you have pain? Is there something we can do that even though they cannot speak anymore, they can't signal with their eyelids anymore or with their hands, we can read their thoughts in a simple way, and so they can communicate with us. But probably it's going to take longer than people hope. There's what's called this valley of death, where even though you can do something in an animal, in a lab, like in a monkey, it still takes you 20, 30, or 40 years to take that technology and apply it to humans, because humans' brains are obviously much bigger and there are many more ethical considerations you have to undergo. But ultimately, yes, there's no question, we will be able to have very powerful brain-machine interfaces.
And here it is, one of the tools. A helmet that can, with its sensors, register what is going on in our brains. This is Brian Johnson, a tech billionaire. His newest company has built the first portable brain scanner. Raphael Juste agreed to be our guinea pig. Brian Johnson has a colorful background. As a Mormon missionary, he spent 2 years in a slum in Ecuador. He left his church and started businesses in various fields: high-tech, real estate, and venture capital.
We will make it light enough so that you can wear it all day, and low cost enough so that everyone will have one.
The helmet registers blood concentration in active brain areas. We were interested in the question, how would the scan look if Raphael would say something outrageously wrong?
Hey, Raphael, what is 5 plus 5?
5 plus 5 is 11. I swear to God, it's 11. You take 5, you take another 5, you count, you get 11.
Okay, and Raphael, when you get to the number 11, if another person's life is now dependent upon this answer being correct, you're comfortable with 11 being the correct number they act upon?
I am completely comfortable.
And this is what the scan showed during this moment.
5 plus 5 is 11.
Experts can decipher where the math went wrong.
This is used for the basis of Genus 2 cryptographic system. So it's showing the group law on a geometric object, which shows the intersection of algebra and geometry in this area. And it's very beautiful to me for that reason.
Christine Lauter is a mathematician, an expert in cryptography and data security. She worked for Microsoft and now is head of the West Coast research of Facebook. Why is it that we hardly see any women in mathematics?
It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. If you speak to women of my age, I'm 51 years old. When I was young, I was one of the only girls that was excelling at math as a child. I loved math, but when I went to college, I was one of the only girls in my honors math classes. And so what you're seeing is a reflection of our past, our society, and our histories. And unfortunately, the few women that have made major contributions to mathematics often have not been recognized or acknowledged.
Now, since we can read the mind and read thoughts in a very first stage at the moment. Could we encrypt our thoughts so that rogue elements cannot read our mind anymore? Can you do that?
Well, so I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I'm quite interested in it, that if you have some device like the helmet we were looking at earlier that is reading your thoughts, and then if those thoughts were going to be stored or transmitted and you're worried about somebody knowing what your thoughts were, then what we could do is on the device itself, on the helmet, we could encrypt those thoughts before they are transmitted anywhere else, and then we could delete them from the device, so that you could assure that people wouldn't have to be worried that all of their thoughts were being captured and later investigated.
Is there a way to absolutely quantum computers or God Almighty interfering that we really can encrypt in a safe way, that nobody can decipher?
Well, no. If you're asking that we can prove that no one can decipher it, the answer is no. With current algorithms, you won't be able to break this system within the next 10 or 20 years.
I'd rather prefer 200,000 years.
Well, I think 50 years is about the best that people are. A lot of the regulation has pointed to standards for 50 years of security.
Now, in search of God Almighty or quantum computers, we went upstate New York to the research headquarters of IBM. Here, the first quantum computer was built. We met Dario Gil, Director of Research and Vice President of IBM. He leads IBM's pioneering effort in quantum computing, and he also speaks publicly about the ethical use of technology.
I have to identify myself.
Please center your eyes and thank you for your
We were invited to the inner sanctum.
So we are going to show you now one of our quantum laboratories where we've been building the very first quantum computers in the world. And what you're actually seeing behind us is a cryostat. And what is remarkable about this is that at the very bottom here, this is one of the coldest places in the universe. So over here, we're operating at about 15 millikelvin. So, well over 100 times colder than outer space. Now we're also building something quite remarkable. You see the size of these cryostats, but we're building a giant cryostat that is going to be able to house over 1 million qubits. And what you're seeing here are the custom-made plates that we have designed to build these giant cryostats that I'll get to show you in a minute. So here is, you see another example of the quantum computer. Now over here are some of the control electronics that allows us to send these very precise energy pulses, microwave pulses that operate about 5 gigahertz, inside the system to exquisitely control these qubits. The way to understand what's happening in a quantum computer is to contrast it to the world of bits, the classical world of zeros and ones. So in the world of normal computers, you get two states. Let's imagine that we have a sphere. And if we put our piece of information in the North Pole, we call it a 0. Or if we put the information in the South Pole, we call it a 1. But now, in quantum world, we have this new notion called qubits. And this is what happens. Instead of just being able to have those two states, say the 0 and the 1, I could put more information and more states anywhere in the sphere. So how many states can I have? Well, the number of states that I can have is 2 to the n, where n is the number of qubits that I have available. So if I build a machine that has 1,000 qubits, now we get to have 2 to the power 1,000. And that's way more particles than there are in the entire universe. And these states get to obey the law of quantum mechanics, which there's a very famous equation called Schrodinger's equations, which says the Hamiltonian of a wave function, these are my states, is...
I admit that I literally understand nothing of this, and I assume most of you don't either, but I found it fascinating that this mathematical formula explains a law that rules the subatomic world.
Evolves over time, is the energy evolution over time. And these qubits obey this equation, and we get to compute in a fundamentally new way.
Can you compute the human brain eventually? Billions, trillions of neurons?
What is interesting is that we know that nature obeys quantum mechanics. We know all of nature obeys this. So if we can build machines that work like nature, we will be able to model nature better, including over time biological systems, because in the end, everything obeys the laws of quantum mechanics.
And here, this is how the inside of the quantum computer looks. The scientists refer to it affectionately as a chandelier. Will it ever model the brain? This is the housing of it. I'm asking myself, have the creators of it lost themselves in a world of pure science fiction? But would it also be good that we do not lose our ability to go out and fish a trout?
Absolutely, that is absolutely existentially important, that we get to cook and paint and fish, of course.
Do you fish?
I do fish. I like to fish. I don't do it that often, but I grew up in Spain and in the Mediterranean, where my family had a place. I used to fish a lot there every day, actually.
We are looking here at tiny creatures called hydra. They can be found in ponds, in lakes, and sometimes they can be a nuisance in your aquarium at home. They are Raphael Juste's prime target of research. This is your workplace.
Yes, this is the lab. Welcome to the lab. So what we do is these hydras, for us, are a little bit like the Rosetta Stone to the brain. Because if we can understand the hydra and we can break the code, it's like breaking the code of an ancient language. It's very likely that evolution is using exact same tricks from hydra to humans.
How tiny are they?
They're about a couple of millimeters to about half a centimeter, depending on the species. They have tentacles. These tentacles have little harpoons that shoot darts, supersonic speeds. This is the earliest nervous systems in evolution. The first animals that have neurons, 750 million years ago, okay? Initially, people thought they were plants. But then it was found that they move and they eat and they're animals. And these are the simplest animals that have a nervous system. They're sort of attached in the bottom to the plate. So they have a foot and they have a mouth, and these are the tentacles. See the tentacles? And with the tentacles, they see the world. They can also smell, they detect chemicals, and they can feel the vibrations in the water, okay? And you know something that's fascinating? These guys have a few hundred neurons, and if they want to move from here to here, they only have one foot. So you know what they do? They somersault. They attach the mouth and the tentacles to the floor, and then they let go of the foot, and then they flip, and they attach the foot on the other side, and they let go of the mouth. So they somersault, and that's how they move from here to here. And this is an animal that somersaults with 300 neurons, and I am a bilaterian with 100 billion neurons, and I cannot somersault. So these little animals can teach us a lot. We suspect that they're social animals, and that each animal knows who he is or who she is, so that they have a self. And this is a fundamental problem in evolution. How do you know that you're one? How do you know that you're you? The neuron that's, let's say, in the tip of the tentacle, or how does it know that it belongs to the same animal to the neuron that's on the other side? How does one part of your brain know that you're part of the same person as opposed to the other part of the brain. So they have to somehow know. No, they have to.
And they're immortal, quasi-immortal.
These hydras are immortal. They don't senesce. They don't get old. You can kill them. You can stamp on them and kill them. But if you feed them, they're continuously living. They regenerate the whole body. Every few days, the entire body has been regenerated, and they are in a state of eternal youth. So Hydra, not only they're immortal, but you can do a lot of mischief. For instance, you can take a Hydra apart with a centrifuge into a soup of cells. So you have all the cells of the animal in a dish, just like here, okay? And then you let this dish, and in 3 days, the animal puts itself back together, self-assembles. Just imagine you took a human, you turn it into a soup of cells, and you come back later and you got back Werner. So you can do this in Hydra. And this is fascinating for us. We're studying this because we can learn the rules of self-assembly. You have to realize that when an animal puts itself back together, there's no director telling each cell what to do. It's a completely distributed network of cells or neurons. And somehow they find each other, they know who to connect to, they rebuild the body, and the animal is completely normal.
As a young researcher, Raphael Yuste made a breakthrough discovery. He developed a technique of calcium imaging that makes it possible to observe every single brain cell. The neurons become luminous when activated. Here, the entire neural system of a hydra.
You're going to see that the animal is moving and the neurons are flashing. See how they turn on and off? These little points of light? This is neuronal activity during the behavior of the animal. You can see how every time there's a contraction, there's a lot of neuronal activity in the tentacles and in the body. Now, this is the mystery. This is the big discovery. Here you have an animal that is not contracting. It's just sitting there like that, no? But look, there's synchronized neuronal activity, like here, now.
Is it thinking?
It could be thinking. This could be the self of the animal. This could be how the animal knows that it's part of the same body, how the neurons here and the neurons there are all part of the same body because they fire together, they're contracting together.
Making a film about brain research, I knew I had to meet this couple, Corey Bargman and Richard Axel. We met them only a few blocks away from Raphael's lab. Apart from science, I had questions that have fascinated me for a long time. Professor Corey Bargman is a world-renowned expert in neural circuits. She is head of science at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Professor Richard Axel won the Nobel Prize for decoding the sense of smell. Professor Bargman, Professor Axel, we have husband and wife for the first time here in our film. You are very eminent as scholars, as scientists. I'm curious that you are apparently studying the neural system of the lowly worm. Can you explain a little bit what you are doing?
When you want to understand the brain, you usually have a choice. You can either study a big, complicated brain, but only a small amount of it at a time or at a great distance. Or you can try to study a whole brain at once, and that's what we do. And in order to do that, we have to study a tiny brain, a brain where we can comprehend it. So your brain has 86 billion neurons in it. A worm's brain has 302 neurons in it. Yet the worm can move around, recognize its kin, eat,
Is there even
smell.
social behavior?
There is even social behavior.
What do they do together?
They gather into feeding groups, and sometimes it's called synchronized swimming. They actually line up against each other, and they change each other's behavior. They'll sometimes come into one area and settle down together.
And Professor Axel, of course, you have studied smell. You have won the Nobel Prize for it, but let me speak about something else, music. How does music affect human beings, the human soul, the human nature, our existence?
I can't give you an answer to that question. I can only tell you the intense importance of art and music to my existence.
Could it be that there's such a thing like axioms of emotions? Axioms of emotions in grand opera?
What do you mean by axiom?
Not further reducible.
Ah,
It is
yeah.
the absolute essence. They do not really factor in human nature. In mathematics, yes, but axioms, I'd say there's a metaphor. Axioms of feelings.
I have a sense that feelings are far more complex. They are reducible. They are a consequence of the way your past has generated your present mind and the way you respond to music and the way you respond to smell calls forth the experiences and feelings of your past. And so they are indeed reducible.
Could we eventually somehow communicate with animals? We hear the birds here. Would we decipher the bird song, the whale songs?
I would hope that we could communicate with animals about their lives. I think one of the reasons that humans keep pets or watch animals in the wild is a sense of a shared understanding of the world and yet a different understanding. There are animals like parrots that we can teach to speak in our language and even ask questions of. There's a famous African gray parrot.
Yes, they're marvelous. They're the
Yes.
best.
Are you famous? All right. How about some animal sounds? Can you do a red wolf? How about an owl? The pretty songbirds? How about a rooster?
But the parrot is actually not in dialogue with us, even
No.
though the parrot speaks.
No. And there is a great barrier between us and the animals now. There are people who want to look for intelligent life on other planets. We should start first to study the intelligent life on our own.
Alexander von Humboldt, on his expedition to the Orinoco in the early 1800s, came across a deserted village. All the villagers had died out, and with them their language. But there was a parrot left who spoke 60 words very clearly. Von Humboldt wrote a dictionary of these 60 words. Let's assume you have two gray parrots. Teach both of them this vocabulary, and they start to speak. What will you make of that?
You know, parrots probably do communicate in part through calls and language, but it is not natural to them to use our language to do so. They would probably turn that into a parrot language, into parrot vocalizations that we would no longer recognize.
Do you have wild debates at dinner table sometimes with controversial opinions? Does it happen? Husband and wife confess.
We try to talk not about science unless something really fascinating has occurred. or very controversial. So our conversations are not about science.
So that's good for marriage.
I don't know what is good for marriage, but for me, it's working spectacularly. Right.
This is a song called Map of Your Mind from my band, the Amygdaloid's second album called Theory of My Mind. So here we go. Here we go. So here we go. Made a map of your mind. I've charted my course. I'm sailing deep inside. I've got the winds of force. I've got the heat of your heart to keep me from the cold.
Got the currents of will to take me to your soul. I'm on a journey that I've got to take. It's a trip that I knew I'd make. An excursion of need and desire. It's a voyage fueled by fire.
Joseph Ledoux is a world leader in the studies of emotions. He helped to establish the main location of fear in the brain.
Dr. Ledoux, you do come from an unusual family, rodeo riders.
Well, my father was a butcher, and his love in life was to ride the bulls in the rodeo. He loved horses, he loved cows. He grew up on a ranch in Louisiana as a child during the Depression, and he basically left town like you would leave with the circus during the Depression to ride in the rodeo because there was nothing else to do.
It could have been your career.
It could have been, but I was a mama's boy.
But you rode on bulls.
I rode some baby bulls, I rode some horses, did a lot of horseback riding.
What is self?
Self is your individual sense of who you are. You know, I think the self is the core essence of everything that you've acquired about yourself over the course of your life. Now, there are different kinds of things that you can acquire. One is factual knowledge about yourself. You know, I was born in Louisiana. I, have a family trait. This is a family trait. We have these crooked little fingers. I know that about myself. At the same time...
Can I see the fingers again?
Oh, yeah, sure. But you can see my son when he comes down. It's the same thing.
Do we invent our own stories?
Yes.
Do we make up our lives?
What we are doing constantly is generating a mental model of the world. And so our minds are constantly narrating our lives. And that's the story we know about ourselves, and we tell to ourselves, and we tell to others, and that's who we are. You know, their war heroes would go around the country after a war telling their story. And each time, the story got a little better every time it was told. So our narratives change every time we tell it.
And fantasy roles for you?
Maybe those are too risque for me to remember in the middle of life.
So you do have dark secrets?
Oh, yeah. Everybody has dark secrets, right?
Neither of us felt like pursuing this any further.
And fear, there are strategies. For example, a beetle playing dead, a tightrope walker. Balance seems to be important for our brain. immobility.
So a person who is balancing on a tightrope and that person's life depends on that, in a sense, that person has to somehow be very calm and in order to stay balanced, right? So that wouldn't necessarily be the fear that's doing that. That is more the kind of survival imperative that is in the brain that allows that person in particular to do what he is doing when he is on the tightrope, because not everybody can do that. So that person has a certain kind of underlying biological mechanism in his brain that allows him or her to walk on the tightrope while at the same time not letting his or her thoughts run away with the experience and then mess everything up. So you have to kind of shut down the thinking process in a way and not let the mental model go into the fear mental state, but instead to be in more of a Zen kind of, everything is great state where you can control it. Because once the mind races into a state of fear or anxiety, then that feeds back down onto all of the brain systems in the body, and all hell breaks loose then.
When the night is dark, I lose my fear. When the night is dark, I never shed a tear. Then the daylight comes, it scares me away. When the daylight comes, that's when I have to fake. When the night is dark, I feel so free. When the night is dark, I feel at peace. Then the daylight comes, it scares me away. When the daylight comes, it's when I have to fade. When the night is dark, I be
The man on the cable is a French high-wire artist Philippe Petit, who in 1974 illegally rigged a wire between the twin towers of the World Trade Center. This made him famous. But we had met and become friends well before that. Philippe lives and trains himself in the Catskill Mountains.
Philippe, you're on a very special cable here at your home. Which one is that?
This is the historic cable of the World Trade Center.
You crossed
Yeah.
illegally in a coup.
Yeah, in 74, after years and years of preparation, this cable was crossing the abyss.
How did you shoot it over? How did you move it?
That was a technical problem. I solved it by having a friend of mine on the North Tower shooting with a bow and arrow a fishing line. Then I got the fishing line, and a lot of rope, stronger and heavier. Later, the cable was going through the chasm.
And how do you overcome fear? I mean, this is a ferocious height.
Fear of what? There is no fear in my world. I exactly know when I put my first foot practicing or performing that I will successfully do the last step. If not, I will run away and like a coward and hide. So there is no fear. Sometimes there is fear after a performance. I land and I look and I say, oh shit, I am mad. What did I do that? And I am terrified. But although I make an exception at the Twin Towers before the first step, I was not afraid, but the frame was terror, because it was the first time a human being will promenade a quarter of a mile in the sky. And it was the first time in my life where I couldn't check the arrival anchor point. Usually before we walk, I check both sides, but here I couldn't fly to the North Tower and check, and my friends were not master riggers, they were friends. So the first few steps, I was praying for the wire to be good enough. It was a very bad rigging, but good enough. And after a few steps on the picture, you see I harbor a giant smile, because not because the wire is comfortable, but because the wire is safe enough. And then my friends told me I stayed 45 minutes improvising, and I did 8 crossings, unbeknownst to me, of course, you know. So it's good. Every day I spend 3 hours practicing, and this faithful little wire stays with me.
And you are untethered. Most of the tightrope walkers are somehow with a safety.
It's a great idea, but it's for the others. I mean, I never thought of it. To me, it's like if you would put a leash to a bird, it will no longer be a bird. So to me, a wire walker is not somebody who risks his life. I have too much reverence for life. I will never risk my life. But it's more noble and majestic. To me, the ideal wire walker is somebody carrying his life across. So if my life is held with 6 little gimmicks, it's not beautiful anymore.
Back to science. At Stanford, we met Carl Dicer-Roth. He is the main inventor of a method to optically activate neurons in animals and control their behavior.
You are encoding animals, you are encoding mice. How do you do that?
We use light. Light in a way that's opposite to how people usually think about the use of light. When we think about light, we think about collecting information from something. But what we've developed is a way to flip that around. We send light in, and we use light to control things inside brains, and we call this optogenetics.
But you have revolutionized the whole field of science with this method, haven't you?
Well, it's given us a new capability that we never had before, and it was a very important one. It allowed us to see what really matters for function. It allowed us to see if you add or take away the firing of neurons in the brain in specific cells, not any cells, one type or another type, or one collection or another collection, you get to see what actually matters for all the mysteries of the brain: action, cognition, sensation, or all of them together.
And why mice?
We use mice, we use rats, we use fish. These are our cousins. These are vertebrates. They have many of the same brain structures we have. It's scaled up vastly in our lineage, but these are our relatives, and they have ancestral and highly conserved structures. And by studying them, we can understand ourselves.
And you are encoding mice with what kind of codes? What do you tell them? What do you want to see?
Well, this has been one of the most remarkable features of optogenetics, is we're finding that we can take an animal and we can turn up or down almost anything about its behavior, very complex patterns of action. We can make an animal more or less aggressive or nurturing or defensive, hungry, thirsty, sleepy, more or less motivated, all these things that are very important to how we think about our priorities, our inclinations, our drives. It was in the summer of 2007, so just about 14 years ago exactly. And I had a brilliant student named Feng Zhang in the laboratory, and what he did was he put a gene from algae, a light-activated ion channel, and this is ion movement through a channel. This is how our neurons work. Normally they're not light-activated, which is why we had to get a light-activated gene from algae. When we did that and we put that into the brain of a mouse and we delivered through a fiber optic light to stimulate those neurons that we had targeted, we saw the animal immediately start to move, to start to circle to the left. We had put this fiber optic into the right part of the brain. As you know, the right part of the brain controls movement toward the left side of the world. And we saw this animal start to circle left immediately as soon as we turned on the light, and when we turned it off, it stopped immediately. Just last year, at the end of 2020, we did an experiment where we used a special virus effectively into the bloodstream, not a direct injection into the brain. So nothing physically entered the brain at all. And we used an extremely sensitive opsin, very light sensitive opsin, so we could deliver light from outside the brain itself. Those two together allowed us to, without ever entering the brain at all, to make mice more social. And so that was an interesting experiment. It shows how far things have come from those early days, and it does point the way to interesting developments in the future.
Could it be that we all live in some sort of constructed fantasy world?
You know, this is an interesting question. The Spanish writer Miguel de Unamuno actually used to speculate on this, and he thought that what we think is real, is really real, is not, that it's all irrational ultimately, and we construct a fake reality around ourselves to protect ourselves from the irrational that is real. And you know, I can't argue with that.
We know that infants prefer to watch the invented reality of cartoons rather than watching real fish and real children.
Baby shark do 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 do. Baby shark do 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 do.
In scientific tests, mice apparently prefer to chase virtual crickets in a totally virtual world that has nothing to do with the world of mice, the mouse hole, the kitchen floor, the carpet. And adolescents in great numbers seem to prefer a world of pure fantasy to the world just outside their own doorstep. Some of them get addicted to video games. This question brought us to the Max Planck Institute near Munich. Matthew McCann is working on his doctoral thesis on behavior of mice in a virtual world. Do mice prefer a virtual reality to the real reality?
That's very hard to say. So this camera here is the mouse.
Yes.
And a mouse would interact with a virtual environment. In this example, this is more of an environment that a mouse would just roam around freely.
So this here, what I'm holding, is actually the point of view of the mouse.
Yes, correct.
And what this camera here sees is our point of view.
Yes.
It looks very artificial.
This dot is as if you were to take just a flat piece of paper and put it into the world, but as you move around this dot, that dot doesn't move with your vision. It doesn't change perspective.
The mouse is seeing what?
The mouse is right now seeing a reflective ball. It's as if you had a ball covered in a mirror. And what it sees is the reflection of the entire world around it. It's as if you were going to a carnival and looking in one of those funny bent mirrors and seeing the world distorted.
And there's a rectangular object in there in the corner.
Yes, it's just this is just a cube.
Do they run over it or do they avoid it? How do they react?
Maybe the first time they'll avoid it, or they'll come and check it out and be curious, but once they realize that there's nothing really here, they'll just run right over it.
Does a mouse suspend disbelief?
I have absolutely no idea. I would love to know. If I were to take my limited evidence, I would say no, but this is completely unanswerable to me right now.
But what can be answered at this point is that with all probability, mice still prefer to hunt real crickets. Back in the real world, back in the northwest of the United States. we met Eberhard Fetz, who developed the first brain-computer interface. At the time, it did not dawn on him that he had made a great discovery.
I was actually a physics student in graduate school. I thought physics was the way to get to the bottom of what is happening here. But I learned through psychedelic experiences that there was a much more interesting fact.
Psychedelic what? Confess.
Psychedelic, well, LSD and psilocybin experiments sort of blew my mind, as they say. And as anyone who's done it knows, it's just a phenomenal experience. And it aroused the epiphany that consciousness was really the most incredible thing.
And you created a brain-computer interface?
Well, more recently, we've created a brain-computer interface. At that time, when I came to Seattle to work as a postdoc, I worked with, I inherited a lab to do whatever I wanted, and explored the ability of monkeys to control brain cell activity. So we trained monkeys to control neural activity for applesauce reward. And the feedback that the monkeys got was in the form of a meter whose deflection was proportional to the amount of close they were getting to their applesauce reward level, right? And so over a couple of days, monkeys really caught on fast and realized they could do something to drive that meter to the right. Monkey just took a couple seconds to figure it out, and then he was driving it more and more. And of course, we made the requirement harder and harder, and so we wanted to see how far he could get. Driving the meter arm with brain activity is now credited, and I'll take it, for doing the first brain-machine interface where the neural activity controls an external device. And I wish that I had realized meter arm, prosthetic arm, why not use this to control prosthetic arm?
Eberhard Fetz wishes his insight could have led straight to this control of a robotic arm. John Donahue is the one who took the next step. He's involved into the most advanced patient studies using brain-computer interfaces. The spectrum of brain ailments is vast.
There are literally more than 1 billion people that are affected by diseases of their brain or their nervous system or their peripheral nerves. And most of them today are treated with drugs, but some of them are now being treated with neurotechnology. For example, in impaired vision, there are implants that are being developed and even available that can help people see again. And, but now a disorder, a big contrast is schizophrenia, which is a thought disorder. People hear voices and have disordered thought. There's really almost nothing to treat there, so that's really at the forefront.
Depression?
Depression affects very large numbers of people worldwide. Maybe 1 in every 5 people have some depression in their life. And we're now beginning to use deep brain stimulation, electrical stimulation techniques to help people with severe depression.
Chronic pain?
Chronic pain, there are devices today that can be implanted in the spinal cord in the back. And since the pain comes in from the body, a stimulation in the back will actually stop the pain from coming in, stop the information from coming in, and people don't feel pain. This is a big success. A lot of people have pain stimulators. This is a big successful application of technology today.
One of the most striking successes has been Parkinson's disease. On the right, we see a patient after a device has been implanted directly into his brain. He walks almost normally. On the left, we see him with the device switched off.
So this is one of the patients that we implanted with the same kind of array technology. She was paralyzed for more than a decade from a stroke and unable to do anything from the neck down. She can't move her arms, she can't do anything. And she is controlling this robot arm only using the thoughts that are being detected and transmitted outside through this connector on her head to computers. And you can see how happy she is that she is controlling this for the first time. She's able to interact with the world.
Jamie Daves has been active in venture capital and policies to reconcile technical progress with moral standards. His personal story is remarkable.
Jamie Daves, your brain has been invaded. What happened?
It's happened, I'll call it 1.5 times. The first time it turned out I had a pituitary tumor for a condition called acromegaly. We called it gigantism also. It makes some people grow quite large, like Andre the Giant. Other people have maybe less dramatic effects. Really, it wasn't until I was about 30 that I was diagnosed, and I had what's called transsphenoidal surgery, where they go up through your nose and they use lasers to remove the tumor. I had great surgeons. It actually didn't work, so I still take medication to control it. So I've had one neurosurgery for that and a second neurosurgery as a result of an accident that I had.
What happened and what did they do?
So I was in an accident, a freak accident. Somebody jumped on my back. One of the things about being a large guy is sometimes people jump on you, and I fell over awkwardly and was instantly paralyzed from the neck down. Unfortunately, I even stopped breathing while in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, had to be intubated, and was a full quadriplegic for a period of time. Luckily, it's a bruise on your spinal cord. They don't promise you anything, but over time I got better and returned my function, more on my left side and eventually more on my right side.
You were in a wheelchair?
So I was in a wheelchair for a period of time for a couple, 2-3 months, and began to be able to walk again later. There's a changed nature of the human experience itself, because with brain-computer interface technologies, we have a new story about what we can do with it to do incredible, wonderful things like getting people out of a wheelchair. But it also creates a set of feedback loops, which actually will impact the human experience as well.
Telepathy is possible by now. I mean, in very first forms. With whom would you like to be in telepathic contact, spanning the entire planet?
I mean, it would be remarkable to see through people very different than myself, hear language in a different way, who experience nature in a different way, who have a
Would you like to communicate with a hummingbird?
Yes. Yeah. There's actually, the only form of mutualism is actually between a bird and a human being and a bird, where the bird actually leads the human being. The bird knows that if it guides the human to a particular plant, that the human being will cut it down, and then the bird can feed off of it. So actually the bird guides the person in that way. And it's an example in nature of interspecies mutualism that's there. So I would love to dance with a hummingbird, but I also like the idea that we're like doing it for each other, that the hummingbird is dancing with me.
We wanted to know how far telepathy has advanced. Rajesh Rao has pioneered brain-to-brain communication as an early form of telepathy. Professor Rau, you are the expert in brain-computer interfaces. What is that?
A brain-computer interface is a device that interacts with the brain. For example, it can read information from the brain, make sense of it, interpret what's going on in the brain, and then use it for a particular purpose, such as controlling a prosthetic device for somebody who may be paralyzed.
But you also do brain-to-brain. How do you do that?
Yes, so as we develop these devices that were controlling robots using brain signals, what happens if instead of sending that command from the brain to a robot, you send it to another person? Essentially, me imagining using this device, moving my own hand, and my partner across campus, Andrea Stocco, a professor in psychology, he was essentially using this device placed in the motor cortex region of his brain. And when the command went from my brain-computer interface to his computer-to-brain interface, using this device, his hand moved, and that in turn completed the cycle. So it was a very simple twitching kind of up and down movement, because this particular device cannot do fine control of the brain. It's almost like a sledgehammer sort of huge device. But what it does is it allows you to generate simple kinds of movements, such as movement of the hand.
But you could force him to type his last will and testament and hand over all his money to you.
Right, we actually joked about that. We actually joked about that, but no, unfortunately, we cannot do any of that. So that's basically beyond the current kinds of technologies like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. We cannot do any kind of fine-grained control. Ultimately, it's possible that even virtual reality, which is right now you wear goggles, it's possible that you could actually experience a virtual world through direct brain stimulation, brain recording. And you may even be able to do beyond wearing goggles. What if you want to have a virtual smell, right, or virtual taste? Right now, you cannot do that, with the devices that people have that they wear goggles. But in the future, if you have the capacity to stimulate the right places in the brain, you could have a virtual smell also.
So you could somehow press a button and I taste the schnitzel.
Yeah, in principle, yeah, theoretically.
And the Bavarian beer.
Right, exactly. And of course, you can ask, is that really the experience? I mean, is that the experience you want to have? I mean, as far as the brain is concerned, it probably it may not know the difference between using your tongue to taste it versus actually directly getting the information that your tongue is sending in principle, right? So the brain itself, the person experiencing it might not be able to tell the difference between the information coming from our body and our sensors on our body versus directly being fed to the brain.
If somebody were dying and you would have this kind of interface, could the person right after dying report back to you that there is heaven?
I think that's something that we can discuss over beer, maybe. But as far as I know, at least at this point, I think that would be something that if the person's already died, I doubt if you're going to get signals from a device such as this, right? I mean, you may get some residual activity, but connecting that to some interpretation of heaven or hell would be a stretch, I think.
I asked this seemingly naive question for two reasons. First, I wanted to go back to the opening of a film I love. It is a silent Soviet film of 1930. It begins with Semyon, an old farmer dying on a pile of apples. The second reason for my question was, brain scans can be unreliable sometimes. They are prone to erroneous readings. Photos of people with different emotional expression were shown to the eyes of a dead salmon. Even their signals were registered, but they didn't come from the dead fish. They were simply noise from the scanner. We traveled on for results that are more reliable. At Princeton University, there's very interesting research about the predictability of storytelling. But this is, I know it as a filmmaker, a hard-to-grasp achievement of the human race. What is foreseeable? Could the First Nations, the natives of this land, have foreseen this? Where is the prairie? Where did the buffalo go? What kind of trees are these to the left and right? The New Jersey Turnpike allows no hint of the past. Werner Herzog from Israel uses fMRI brain scans to predict mental activity of human subjects, including storytelling. Professor Herzog, you are doing brain scans here. What's behind the wall, behind the screens?
So this is an fMRI machine.
Right behind the wall.
Right behind. We see it to the camera and to the window over here. And basically, we can place people into this like scanner, which is like a huge magnet. We can look how people communicate. So basically, what we are doing, we have people in the scanner telling stories, and I scan the brain of the speaker while he's telling stories. And then I have the brain of the listeners as they also listen to the story. And I can see how information is going from one brain to another brain. So we took a story by J.D. Salinger. And this is a story that he was written in a very particular way. The story is about a husband which lost track of his wife in a party, returned to his own apartment by himself at the middle of the night, very anxious guy, calling his best friend, asking, "Did you see my wife?" Next to the best friend, there is a naked woman. And Salinger is smart. It doesn't tell you her identity. So you need to guess. As good scientists, we ruin the surprise and the ambiguity. For half of the people that listen to the story, we told them, this is the wife, she's having an affair with the best friend. For the other half of the subject, we told them, this is the girlfriend, the wife is very faithful, and this husband is very jealous. So we gave them a different memory or context about this like person. And now they're all coming and listening to the exact same story. And this is how you look if you think the wife have an affair, and this is how it's look like when you think that the husband is jealous. Now I'm giving you a new subject, and you need to guess what this subject is thinking. We're looking how similar you are to this type of people or to this type of people.
Even for a non-expert, it is obvious that the new listener at the bottom predicts a story like the one on the upper right.
We can predict what you're thinking in 90% confident.
Could you in the future read my mind and read my new movie before I even film it?
I don't think I will be managed to read your entire movie before, but I...
Let's say a sequence of it, the opening sequence.
The opening sequence. Before you are thinking about it.
We put a camera just here and let it roll.
I will say probably it sounds like science fiction. So I think we are far, far away from being able to do it.
The screens will stay blank for quite a while into the future. The films in my head will materialize the old-fashioned way. The screen actually belongs to the Roxy Theater in San Francisco that has shown a number of my films. David Lynch was guest here, and so was John Waters. Next to his photo, you can see me some 25 years ago. We asked Jack Gallant to meet us in the projection booth. He's a world leader in decoding mental imagery. Professor Gallant, we are here with old-fashioned celluloid projectors. Where are the images hidden in our brain?
So our ability to decode information from the brain is directly proportional to brain measurement, and therefore, as measurement improves, the one thing we know is your ability to decode brain activity will improve.
And I may not need a camera anymore.
Right. So
you could read it. You could read my images. You could decode my movie that's only in my head.
Exactly. In fact, of course, we can do that to a very poor extent now.
Indeed, the elephants on the right, read directly from the brain, are still very fuzzy. And so is the parrot.
For any concept you can think of in the brain, there's not just one location. There are dozens of different locations where that concept is represented. So, for example, if you see something that is beautiful and you have the experience of it being beautiful, there would be a bunch of visual areas that would represent that information. So if we click over on this red voxel here, on the lower right, down here, you can see a word cloud that tells us the concepts that are represented in that voxel when you listen to a story.
A voxel is a tiny three-dimensional spot in our cortex.
The concepts that this voxel represents are a bit mixed up. We have brown, tiger, pitcher, pound, goose, stole, sheriff. It's a mixed bag of selectivity that's, not really clear.
I had always assumed that certain images or concepts had their single specific location. But what have sheriff and goose at the top in common with robin, purse, and the number 7 at the bottom? All in one single spot of our brains.
There are a lot of things that happen in the brain that we are not really aware of, or only dimly aware of. In fact, most things that happen in the brain we're only dimly aware of. Our conscious experience of the world and what we think is happening and what we think we're thinking about and what we think our motivations are and our justification for our actions and our plans and goals, a lot of that is a constructed narrative we consciously create to explain our daily behavior. The human brain really never contains any truth. It's always shades and nuances and that are all reflections of the prior history of the person who experienced them.
Where our numbers and names and concepts are located can be mapped. But there is no map of our thoughts. Our road trip took us to Tom Gruber, one of the creators of Siri. He's widely considered a visionary in the field of artificial intelligence.
Tom Gruber, you are the creator of Siri.
Yeah, well, one of the three, yeah.
Sure. And would Siri understand me when I say a sentence that has the word night in it? And it would somehow understand night, it's getting dark in the moon. But I mean the medieval knight in its armor. How stupid is Siri?
Well, it all depends on, I don't work on Siri anymore, and I don't know what they're currently doing. So just like the way you explained night as in medieval night, if you said that sentence to a speech recognizing system, today it's more likely to get the right version of night. We could try it, actually. Where's the Siri? So what did you say? What night is in?
Night, yeah.
Send a text to, hold on.
But
send a text to, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll just dictate a text to you here. We'll send one here. So we'll say, I mean night as in medieval night. Okay? And so it didn't get it right. If I tap on the second, it still doesn't get it right. So no, it doesn't have that yet.
I got intrigued by the images on the screen behind him. As an avid diver, he himself shot all of them. I was always fascinated by simultaneous behavior.
But school of fish who react all in the same way as if it were only one body, how do they do that?
I love this topic. The fish, the reason they school is because schooling is adaptive, right? They have a brain that's perfect for identifying whether there's a fish near them and being able to move quickly, right? But they can't school, and some schools can get pretty big, right? But they can't deal with avoiding nets, for instance, which is taking them all out. So we have the equivalent going on with humans right now. We have to realize that we're, in a fish-like way, blind to the situation of our collective stupidity.
And when you look back here for a moment, Kevin,
yeah.
This looks like a fantasy world. It looks like out of a movie.
Landscapes always played an important role in my films, in particular landscapes of the soul. Do fish have souls? Do fish have dreams? Do they only dream this landscape? Do they think? Do they have thoughts at all? And if so, what are they thinking about? Is the same thought simultaneously in all of them? Is this what they dream collectively? Could they have visions of albino flowers that do not exist underwater? Are we floating in a strange and beautiful reality? Do we dance in our minds? Is this paradise where there are no boundaries anymore? We can observe the dance of fireflies, but their choreography is beyond our comprehension. For the firefly, the full moon casts its shafts of light on the floor of the forest. We can only stand by and marvel.
Sometimes what I need to do is to practice the surgery in my mind before actually being in the operating room.
Dr. Edward Chang is a brain surgeon. He became famous for decoding mental language and transforming it into synthesized speech. He gave us permission to film him during brain surgery. His colleagues and the patient all agreed. First, a hole had to be drilled into the skull.
Oh, yeah, watch yourself, come over here.
For me, most astonishing was to see the brain pulsing with a heartbeat.
We can see the surface of the cerebellum, the back part of the brain.
The operation was meant to relieve unbearable pain. The white matter to the left is a thick bundle of nerves that connect to the face. An artery was pressing with a protrusion right into the stem of nerves, leaving the patient with such pain as if a dentist was drilling into all of his teeth at the same time. The patient was instantly relieved of pain and left the hospital 2 days later. Dr. Chang also gave us access to results of his work translating mental speech into audible words.
For the past decade, we've been very interested in understanding how the brain allows us to speak. The words that I'm saying right now generated from brain activity to control the vocal folds, the mouth, the lips, the tongue when we speak. And over many years, we've been able to discover essentially how neural activity in the cortex, the cerebral cortex in particular, gives rise to the ability for the vocal tract to shape the breath when we speak. It's a very, very precise and coordinated movements of the vocal tract that allow us to speak. We just wanted to understand that if you could record from this part of the brain, is it possible to generate and synthesize someone's speech just from the brain activity alone?
First, we hear a sentence directly synthesized from a thought.
Shipbuilding is a most fascinating process.
And then human speech.
Shipbuilding is a most fascinating process.
Another example.
Bright sunshine shimmers on the ocean.
Bright sunshine shimmers on the ocean.
Bright sunshine shimmers on the ocean.
This was only possible through a chip implanted into the brain that captured, with its sensors, what the brain wanted to say but couldn't. But what we see here is the future. Carelessly tossed into a cheap cardboard box, this will change the world. This jumble of electronics was brought to us by Ken Shepard, considered a genius of chip making. Dr. Shepard, you're into chip making.
Indeed. I started my career at IBM working on microprocessors. And since I come to Columbia, I've been trying to look at ways to employ integrated circuit technologies and things other than the things you usually think of them in, like computers and communication devices. There's also opportunities to use integrated circuits as a way of making interfaces to biological systems, and that's been my principal focus over the last 15 years or so.
Biological systems, the brain.
Including the brain, but also other things as well, and not just neuroscience, but also other applications of integrated circuits to biology more generally.
You brought something with you. Can
I
you
did.
see it?
This is an example of something we've been calling a chip as system. This is the idea that you make an implantable device that is nothing more. It consists of only a single integrated circuit chip and nothing else. So this chip has to include all the functions that you would need in your system. So this is a chip that's designed to sit on the surface of the brain.
Inside the skull. Inside.
Under the skull, right? Directly on the surface of the brain, so directly under the skull. Outside the skull, you wear a little antenna. Right now, it's a pretty clunky little board, but this is ultimately will be a wearable.
Can you show it for the camera?
I can. This is a pretty clunky prototype right now. There's an antenna that sits directly outside the skull. This interfaces to a larger printed circuit board, and this is actually connected. I don't have the board connected here. This actually becomes a Wi-Fi hub. So the plan is to ultimately get the approval from the FDA to actually implant this in humans. But as part of those initial studies, we've been doing studies in non-human primates, in monkeys. And the way the device is inserted is quite nice. You basically make a very small opening in the skull, a very small opening in the dura. The device basically slides right in and then sucks up against the surface of the brain. And then those openings are small enough they just close over, heal over. This is for people who have lost their sight due to traumatic injury to the optic nerve. So they have an intact visual cortex because they once were seeing. So their visual cortex developed. So they have all the machinery in their brain to see, but they just lack the stimulus coming from their eyes because of traumatic injury.
So you can make the blind seeing again?
So the idea is that if you place a device like this directly on the visual cortex and stimulate the visual cortex directly, you can create a visual perception. This has been done already at the scale of around 64-ish electrodes. where they can create perceptions of what they call phosphenes, so the images of light that you can see in the visual field. So the question is, if we can create 64,000 electrodes or 65,000 electrodes, as we have on this chip, can we create a much richer visual perception? And that's really not known. We're making chips now that are 350 microns in size, so they're about the size of a dust mite. So you can't even see them with the naked eye. And they can be injected with a hypodermic needle. In fact, we've done that. That's how they're delivered.
Chips are normally brittle, but this one bends, adjusting to the movement of the brain. It is also resistant against fluids.
When you normally stick an integrated circuit chip in salt water, it's not going to be very happy, right? So you have to passivate it in a way that when you stick it in salt water, the salt water isn't going to destroy it.
How much salt water is in your brain?
It's a bag of salt water, a lot. I don't know how much there is, but your body is mostly salt water, and your brain is no exception to that. It's mostly salt water.
Now, with the tool makers in our focus, we inevitably ended up at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. We met Polina Anikeyeva, who only weeks before was promoted to tenured professor.
Professor Anikeyeva, it's good to see women in science, but you come from a lineage of female scientists. Can you explain?
My very first mentor in St. Petersburg in Russia, where I started my research, was Tatiana Maximovna Bernstein, who is considered the mother of polymer physics. And she was kind enough to adopt me as a young researcher when I was a freshman in college and give me an opportunity to do theoretical physics at that very, very early age. I consider myself a heavy experimentalist. I work at the intersection of material science and neuroscience, developing neurotechnology, and we pursue a couple of different technological platforms. One based on multi-material fibers, where we can incorporate electrodes for neural recording, optical waveguides for neuromodulation, drug delivery, all into fibers that are as thin as your hair. We're also working...
They go into the brain itself.
They go into the brain, they can go into the spinal cord, they can go into the nerves, they can go into other parts of the nervous system.
But you are creating fiber optics. Would you be daring enough to insert it into the brain of your little child?
If my little child ended up needing it for a medical reason, I would absolutely dare to insert it into her brain.
Could it be that in our thoughts, in our self, we are in some sort of theater of thoughts, in an imaginary world that's only existing in our brain? I ask the engineer now.
Why not? I guess if our interpretation of the world is comes as a program in our brain, ultimately our brain can produce many different interpretations of the world. Let's say somebody who has severe delusions, they create worlds. Their brain creates alternate realities. So there is no reason that, this reality that we are experiencing is actually real.
Is this building behind you for real, if you look at it?
I think this building is real. I kept walking up and down those steps for the past decade. I feel the stiffness of the stone. I hear the sound of my shoes clicking on that stone. I can get to my office through those stairs. There are other people seem to be perceiving the same reality, but I don't have a frame of comparison. I haven't had a chance to perceive an alternate reality, so for me, this is the only one that exists. what made our group unique is that we were the first ones to begin applying fiber fabrication methods to create neurotechnology.
Did you learn from the spider?
I actually learned from my colleague. And I would say that inspiration for me came not from the spiders, but from hair and from nerves. Because when you look at nerve endings, they look like fiber. They don't look like silicon wafers. They look fibrous. They look organic and soft. And also, I don't know whether you have seen a movie Avatar. I'm sure you remember they have those tails, and they pick up that tail, and it all moves and glows. And it looks like a whole bunch of optical fiber. And then they take that fiber, and then they attach it to this nervous system of their planet. And that is how sort of visually you can think of our fiber attaching to the brain. So again, it's very capable, it's very thin, and it stealthily integrates into the brain.
Okay, so we're feeding this down into the oven now.
I would let you do it so I don't break your piece of equipment. This is, so what happens inside the oven is basically a structure that looks like this. And then inside this furnace, it's going to get heated, and then we'll catch this thread as it starts flowing, and we attach it to the capstan, and then that begins pulling off the fiber, and this massive sort of block going to get reduced to a hair. A typical length would be between 50 meters and a kilometer. So this one can be used in the spinal cord, where this, you can see one LED, and you can also see light coming out from the tip, but we can put multiple LEDs, and then we can go along the vertebrae and try to stimulate sort of segments of the spinal cord at different vertebrae.
She's also researching nanoparticles. Their material is similar to the rust on your water pipe.
So these are the magnetic nanoparticles. Those are the tiny magnets that respond to magnetic field and convert it into languages of neurons. They can convert magnetic field into heat. They can convert magnetic field into mechanics. They can convert magnetic field into delivery of a drug. They're very magnetic. As you can see, I can move them with a magnet all around, which also means we can move them with a magnet inside the body to deliver them to a given location in the brain or anywhere in the nervous system.
How tiny are they compared to a grain of sugar?
I want to say they're probably 1/20,000th of a grain of sugar.
So in a grain of sugar, you can place 20,000 of those particles.
At least, but maybe actually in a grain of coffee, you can place 20,000 of those. In a grain of sugar, it's probably more like 100,000. They're very safe. You can drink them under our control. They can allow us to control neurons. We can give commands to the brain.
I'm asking myself, how much are we programmed in our minds? Are we, behind our facades, ghost-written, as in all cultures and all epochs of history? For advice, we turned towards a philosopher. We met Sarah Goering, an expert in free will and bioethics.
Professor Goering, as a philosopher, you're confronted with the incredible advances in neurotechnology, neurosciences. What are the new questions?
Oh, there are so many new questions.
Go into the most burning ones.
The most burning new questions, I would say, especially when we talk about implanted neural devices, there are real questions around how we are as human agents in the world. And by that I mean people who can enact our intentions on the world. And the internal private space seems really important and challenged by some of
The thoughts, our thoughts, the privacy, the autonomy of our thoughts.
That's right. So it's both access to them, but then control over them. So some of the devices are recording from the brain to drive something else outside of us, a cursor or a robotic arm. But other ones are about stimulating areas of the brain, hopefully to help us in particular ways. They can be used therapeutically, as treatment, but also sometimes to try to bring about certain behavioral changes. And that seems like a kind of potential for manipulation that's very worrisome. It could be putting an idea, a particular kind of word into your head. And you can think about the ways that advertisers would be delighted with that opportunity. If I have something like the kind of device that various companies are interested in making that can read out from my neural activity to help me surf the internet or type something, right? If it's a two-way channel and it can come back in too, then there might be ways that they can put ideas for what I should be buying, as they do with ads at the side of my screen, but now directly into my brain.
And what if we had some implants in us already? You included?
So do I know that I don't have an implant?
Would you know?
Descartes would say, I do not know that for certain. The question is, would I know or could I know for sure? I think, I mean, if they're good functioning ones, possibly not. I feel worried about saying that because I don't want to feed the rumors that we know are out there for seriously mentally ill people who do have this belief. But I will say this, at least to get a neural device now, right, especially an implantable one requires a brain surgery, you're going to know, right, if that kind of thing is happening. You'll have some awareness of that.
We wanted to know what was going on in hospitals concerning ethical questions. We went to the Weill Cornell Medical Center in New York. Joe Finns is a practicing doctor. He's also an expert in medical ethics.
Dr. Finns, you have seen extraordinary progress in neuroscience with glorious and phenomenal applications. But as an ethicist, do you see dangers?
One of my greatest concerns, one of the greatest dangers, is the progress won't continue. It won't be funded, or we'll regulate it out of existence. I think it's really important that we think about rights in two ways. One, the possibility of infringing rights, with questions of neural privacy and the like. And the other hand, are the rights of people who have brain injury, who need the right to be able to communicate. And sometimes those rights come into conflict. So I think we have to negotiate that very carefully in order to understand that rights go both ways. There are negative rights and positive rights. And I think there is a lot of concern right now about negative rights, about liberty, freedom, autonomy, but there are also the need to provide rights to people who, by the lottery of the universe, have had a brain injury, have mental disorders, neuropsychiatric conditions that have imperiled their ability to participate fully in society.
What about, let's say, somebody who is deeply into conspiracy theories? Would you put them eventually in a straitjacket?
I think it does raise the question of when we pathologize beliefs, and if you pathologize beliefs that you don't agree with. This happened in the Soviet Union, where dissidents were categorized as being mentally ill and institutionalized.
Yes, because if you do not accept paradise on earth, you must be insane.
Right. Not that long ago, people who were gay and lesbian were reprogrammed, were thought to be reprogrammed because that deviant behavior, quote unquote deviant behavior, was perceived as aberrant and something that needed to be reprogrammed. So when we talk about that kind of intervention, we have the risk of running astray and running afoul of people having the right to love who they love and be who they are.
Of all the scientists we met, there was not a single one who could explain to us what a thought is or what consciousness is. But all had one thing in common. They were keenly alert to the ethical questions involved in neuroscience. New legislation is in the making. For many years, Raphael Juste has worked closely with Jared Genzer, an award-winning international human rights lawyer. The new facts in science will inevitably create new norms.
Jared, what do we do about regulation of neurotechnology at the global scale?
So, look, I think the international community is totally unprepared for what's coming and how fast the advances in neurotechnology are taking place. And there are a whole wide array of ways in which we have to address these concerns. The first is at the United Nations level, where we're talking about creating new international human rights that would protect citizens of the world from misuse or abuse of neurotechnology by governments. Next, there's the level of governments and national regulation. From there, you have to look at companies and ethical standards for companies and how they do their work. And then lastly, we really need to look at people around the world and citizens of the world to engage in trying to address these kinds of problems. Neurotechnology already is capable of reading words that are in the human brain. And so my fear as a human rights lawyer is what happens when that technology gets more advanced and you could put that on, for example, the head of a criminal defendant who's been accused of committing a crime, and then you don't even need to get really any information from them at all. You interrogate them and then you read what their brain is thinking. And if you're accusing them of a crime, they're going to be thinking in their heads, oh no, he has me, he does, what if my thoughts betray me, right? And so I think that these are, very serious potential misuses of neurotechnology that will fundamentally interfere with our basic right to privacy. And so this is why right now we need to be talking about putting in place an international human rights protection framework. So there's a clear signal sent to countries around the world, to governments, to companies, and to private citizens about exactly what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of the practice and application of neurotechnology.
How can this be enacted by binding laws for every single human being? And here comes a surprise. As the first country on the planet, Chile has just adopted a constitutional amendment articulating a new form of human rights. The Senator Guido Girardi has been the spearhead of this vote. Raphael Juste was invited as an advisor to this plenary session. The vote in the Senate, as a first step, was passed unanimously at the end of this very Zoom session. But my voyage into our mind ultimately leaves me more mystified. What created this theater of thought? Who was a ghostwriter of this? And who was a ghostwriter of that one?
Why do we feel so afraid? Why do we feel so afraid? Don't have to look very far. Don't get stuck in the rut. Don't go looking too hard. It's all in the nut. In your brain. When will we feel less afraid? When will we feel less feel less afraid? How can we feel less afraid? Don't have to look very far. Don't get stuck in a rut. Don't go looking too far. It's all in the nut. In your brain.